All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. My name is Dave, and I am the Radical Independent. Thank you for watching my channel and subscribing and hanging out with me. There's not a lot to do these days as we kind of watch the political system unravel before our eyes. We kind of have a little bit of breaking news in the midst of this video that I'm doing today. Joining me is libertarian activist, the naturalist capitalist. His name is Reed Coverdale. How are you, Reed?
I'm doing well, Dave. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we've been kind of debating back and forth on Twitter. We've had some feisty exchanges over there a few times, and I admire your persistence, I guess it would be, and the fact that I always like people who have a belief system and have researched it and can argue it and really be passionate about it. So give us your take. You know, you're a libertarian, obviously. I wore a shirt for you, by the way, today because I have this T-shirt.
I like it.
Yeah,
yeah.
It says Libertarian Party Animal on it, so it's kind of like, you know, you walk into a store, people just think you like to party or something. But I actually got it because I like the whole libertarian, I like the porcupine thing, and I try to get conversations started with people. So I walk into a room and they go, "Hey, so you're a libertarian?" And I go, especially on things like war, I'm very libertarian. On things like the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, 10th Amendment, count me in as very libertarian. This whole COVID-19 thing is scaring the crap out of me in some ways. The HR 6666 bill, there's 4 of them, I believe. The one that Tulsi Gabbard is like, yeah, full steam ahead on that one. And they're going to, you know, I'm looking out my window here and I'm wondering if, you know, some government truck is going to show up and these guys in hazmat suits are going to jump out and want to take my temperature and stuff. So I'm a little frightened of that. As much as I think government has a role, I'm really, this is getting weird, and I'd love to get your take on this.
Yeah, so I was raised a Republican, but then I realized that Republicans are not what they say they are. They say they're for responsible spending, small government, individualism, but they are until they're not. They're really kind of like, you know, they're just the flip side of the Democratic Party. They support almost all the same policies. They just disagree on, you know, some social issues like abortion and gun control and, you know, sometimes the environment and gay rights less and less. But so there's just like 4 or 5 issues they disagree on, and everything else they completely vote the same way. So when I was in high school, I got interested in Ron Paul, and he kind of started pulling me away from the Republican Party. And then last time in 2016, I was a big supporter of Rand Paul. And then when Trump won the Republican nomination, I was just like, okay, I want absolutely nothing to do with standing behind this party anymore. So I voted for Gary Johnson. But I wasn't really a full libertarian until Tulsi actually turned me into a libertarian, because I was a supporter of hers, but I disagreed with her on, you know, probably 20% of the issues or something. And I was willing to forego those because we agreed on things that were really important, like civil liberties, war. She was actually big on the deficit and responsible spending. She was. And so I was like, okay, I can get behind this. And I actually started rethinking about things like free college and Medicare for all. And, you know, I was like, okay, I'm going to hear these ideas out, and maybe I'm missing something. And she had a more nuanced approach than Bernie. Like with her free college plan, she admitted that the reason college is so expensive is because we subsidize degrees that kids have that they're not going to get jobs for. So we're, you know, racking up this debt. We need to be smarter about how we're going to, you know, how we're going to fund college. So I was interested in her approach and I was willing to listen. But I've become more and more libertarian the last 2 months just because of seeing what the government actually does, regardless of what it's supposed to do, whatever good intending politicians want it to do. You know, if someone as seemingly good as Tulsi can go along with what's happening right now, or someone who's as staunchly progressive as Bernie, you know, if they can support what's going on right now and they can just sign these bills because there's a little tiny sliver that helps people, and they'll, you know, pile in all the other corporate bailouts and, you know, waste and crap that just goes into it. I don't have any confidence that if someone gets in there, regardless of how good they say they're going to be, that they're actually going to do that. So if you actually look in Congress right now, the people who've been principled and voted against these things are the libertarian Republicans like Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, Justin Amash. They're the only ones that aren't selling us out to corporate America, you know? And that philosophy is a lot easier to get to from here than a idealistic government that redistributes wealth and takes care of all of us. Because the libertarian philosophy, we could get 90% of it with veto and repeal. You know, you can just veto these spending bills if you had a libertarian president. If you had someone like Bernie, you know, most of his platform, you have to get Congress to pass it, and the likelihood that they'll even pass it without all this stupid crap in it, to me, that foregoes the argument of whether or not his ideas are even good. I think I would argue against some of the principle of his ideas, but I don't think they'd even get through in the form that he wants. You know, we'd just be piled on with all this crap that we get. So I'm at the point where I am for rolling things back. You know, I think government is there to protect us, protect our rights, protect your property. You know, I would say protect the environment to a point. Libertarianism, as I've talked with you before, is kind of a sliding scale as far, you know, you have some people who are anarchists, and then you got some people who believe in rule of law, but that, you know, it should be limited as much as possible. So I'm at the point where I just want a government that is going to protect me but leave me alone, and a government that believes in equality before the law. So we hear about gay rights, black rights, women's rights, you know, whatever they are. Libertarians believe in the smallest minority, which is the individual. So it doesn't matter if you're black, white, male, female, gay, straight, like everybody deserves the same exact rights before the law, and no one should be discriminated against. And that government is really bad at providing. The government really should be there mostly to restrict, not provide, because whenever it provides, that's what we have right now. And regardless of what people hope for, it doesn't end up being that. So,
yeah. I guess, you know, and where I think you and I we agree on, I think we talked about this a couple of times in conversations. We talked a lot about, you know, there is so much corruption within government. And I think there is definitely a movement, I would say, on the true progressive left, I would say, and you want to call it the libertarian right. I don't know if that's even accurate, but there are a couple of groups on either side of the political spectrum these days that are starting to notice the same things, and they're starting to kind of key in on things. They might approach it differently. Like the Green Party might say, okay, well, we need a government solution. And I would listen to them because they would say, well, wait a minute, it's not the kind of solution you think. For instance, like ownership. Like they would say, well, the government's not going to own this entity. You're going to own it as an individual with others, and you're going to make a decision with other people, whether that be some kind of local cooperative or some you know, larger entity, where before there was an authoritarian, and that authoritarian could be running a corporation or they could be within the government. And a lot of times people are now starting to see that these two things are almost the same. And you're seeing it now with like guys like Jeff Bezos and Amazon, who, you know, more or less have all of this power and control. And how does libertarianism look at a guy like Jeff Bezos, who clearly is benefiting from all kinds of what I would consider crony capitalism, and really because his company, his corporation, he owns the Washington Post on top of that. And so he's got an arm of communications out there. He can influence how people think. Would that be something that a libertarian would come in and try to regulate or control? Or what do you do with these corporations that have basically become like arms of the federal government to some degree?
Right. So first of all, you said that the two sides are noticing that they hate the same problem.
Yeah.
That's totally true. So capitalism in a lot of people's minds today is a terrible thing. And that's because what their view of capitalism is what Republicans and Democrats too have co-opted. They're saying this is capitalism. So in people's minds, capitalism is bank bailouts, industry bailouts, subsidies, private corporations getting government mandated monopolies. That is not capitalism. Free market capitalism takes the crutch of the government away from business. So back in 2008, when we bailed out all the banks and we bailed out the auto industry and whatever else we did, libertarians were screaming against that. The Occupy Wall Street movement wasn't just, left-wingers. There were a lot of libertarians there saying, end the Federal Reserve, stop this quantitative easing.
Yep.
What libertarians believe, and what I've really come to realize is true, is that a lot of these problems we have are because the government is meddling in the market. So when an economy is it's a little weird right now because we have the disease, but let's use instances in the past where the economy starts struggling. So what the government does is the Federal Reserve artificially brings interest rates down as low as they can. Right. And in their mind, that is helping the economy because people will continue to borrow and spend. Where borrowing and spending is what has led us to this catastrophe we're in now. Everybody was working paycheck to paycheck, and that's because they're getting approved for loans they don't deserve. They're spending money they don't have, just like the federal government is. So everything is payments, payments, payments. People go through life without owning anything. And then when a interruption happens and they can't pay their bills, they're sunk because they're in debt. And then the other ideas like college, the reason college tuition is so high, they said it was because of the bankers giving out loans. So I think it was about 8 years ago, they got rid of bankers in the middle. So now the government guarantees any loan that, or pretty much any loan that a kid applies for. So that just pushes the price of college up because colleges can charge whatever they want, and they know that the government is going to guarantee the loan. So I don't know all of the specifics about Jeff Bezos in particular, but we are not in favor of the government favoring corporations. A free market means everyone is allowed to fail. So this giant bailout package that passed a couple months ago, if you look, the libertarian-minded people in Congress voted against it. Their idea is like the airlines, they shouldn't survive this. If an airline doesn't have any savings and people are not flying, there's no reason the taxpayer should pay the burden for that. They should let them go bankrupt.
Yeah.
And then when this crisis is over and people start flying again, someone else can buy that, buy the airline out and restart it. So the idea that the idea that we shouldn't go through market corrections, that we should just try to prop up every economy every time something comes through, is actually what just exacerbates all the problems and makes them worse. So libertarians would say, the problem is corporations, but they have their power because of the government. If the government wasn't there to bail them out, if it wasn't there to monopolize them, if it wasn't there to give them everything they want, they'd have no power. So what you have to do is decouple state and business, just like church and state. If you look through history, church and state, when they get together, it's always bad. The Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, same idea with business. When you look at business and government getting in each other's pockets. You have the power flowing to the corporations and the money flowing to the government. It's never good. So libertarians are definitely with progressives on that. What they don't think is that just expanding government is going to fix the problem. You know, it's both. It's the reason these horrible entities have all their powers because the government gets it to them. So you have to separate them, and then you limit both of their power, basically.
All right. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because I wanted to give some folks a different perspective on some of these issues. And the other thing that I wanted people to see is that on a lot of issues, you know, we're not really all that far apart. People who I know watch my channel, a lot of them are former Tulsi Gabbard supporters because I kind of built my whole channel initially around her campaign, doing video after video about, you know, what she was doing right, what people were doing to her, and so forth. So I gained a following based on that. But when she dropped out, I had nowhere really to pivot. I wasn't going to keep talking about the horse race, about how, you know, Joe Biden isn't coherent and so forth. I turn on all these so-called progressive channels, and all they know how to do is talk about how Joe Biden might have Alzheimer's, or how, you know, the DNC screwed Tulsi and Bernie and so forth. And I'm thinking to myself, we have to do better. We have to come up with a way to break through on maybe a half dozen core issues. You and I might disagree on how we get there in the end, but we have to start having a conversation about these real issues that confront the country. Years ago, which was really funny, and you'll see where my political life has been all over the place. I was very much like you. I actually met Gary Johnson at a pub up in Worcester, Massachusetts, following a Campaign for Liberty rally that was held in the city. And there were people there, obviously, from the Tea Party, if you remember that little outfit. And I always laugh and I always poke fun at Tea Partiers, because they kind of disappeared once Trump got elected and started going, yeah, Trump, you know? And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. I mean, the deficit's exploding. Spending is like any other president, basically, if not worse. He's built the military. He did say that he was going to do that, but he also talked about how, you know, he didn't want conflicts with Russia, and that, of course, turned him into a Russian agent, Russian asset. And then, you know, the national security state is, you know, put on alert, supposedly, because Trump used language that he wasn't supposed to. I guess I say all this, and you've talked about, you know, if you pass a bill, there's going to be all this extra crap in it, as you said. How in the world are we going to break through to people that, number one, some of whom are really hooked on this cult of personality? And it was there with Tulsi Gabbard. It was definitely there with Bernie Sanders for a long time. It's obviously there for Donald Trump. Now with Biden, there's no cult of personality with Biden, because I don't even know if there's a personality in the shell right now. So I don't think that's an issue. But people, they have this vision, we're going to return things to the normal way. You mean the normal, like I said on Twitter, the normal way of corruption. You want the normal corruption back, and that will make you feel comfortable. It seems that many Americans are disconnected from what I would consider, like I always say on my channel, the real meat and potatoes issues that confront us: healthcare, education, the environment. You can name all these different rights that I talked about at the beginning, where, again, I'm not a huge Second Amendment guy, but because I do believe that we need to take a look at background checks, especially because mental health is typically always a factor when there is a major shooting, and the media likes to just talk about, you know, the firearms. They're not talking about, you know, the stuff that led up to that moment. They think if you just take all the sharp objects away, everybody's going to be civil, and they're going to say, oh, it'll be like the UK, or it'll be like, you know, someplace in Europe and so forth. And I don't have a lot of answers for these issues anymore because I watch my fellow Americans go about their business and they're so enthralled by this 24-hour news cycle, the nonstop sort of chattering class that never shuts up about anything. And you can't break through, like having this conversation between you and I. It doesn't really happen in the media. What they do is they put one person up, they put another person up. Whoever gets the best one-liners, and this is how they do debates now too, wins. And Americans are left like, okay, what did they just say? Is that going to help me? Is that going to hurt me? And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on just the state of politics in general right now, and how do you break through with a message? How, as a libertarian, for instance, are you going to try to, say, appeal to a younger person, for instance, who may have been really enamored with a Bernie or Tulsi, especially Bernie Sanders, who had an amazing 2 campaign cycles that just got shut down in a way that almost feels like it was criminal, whether you like Bernie or not. You have to think to yourself, something's wrong. This isn't right. Can a third party crack through? So I mean, I threw a lot out there, so I'll just let you,
Yeah.
take it away.
So you asked a few things there. One was, how can we come together? And, that's why I supported Tulsi, because even though I didn't agree with her on everything, I thought, wow, this is someone who could really be dangerous to that false dichotomy we have of left and right. Because she wasn't, and I know you said this about her, I didn't really think she was a progressive, like a straight progressive. She was kind of an anomaly. She had views that kind of went everywhere. So, she could kind of appeal to everybody. I kind of thought the same way about Jesse Ventura. I would vote for Jesse Ventura if I thought he could win. And then I thought the same about Justin Amash. I think he was not like Jacob Hornberger. He's not so idealistic and, straight line. He had, listened to his interviews. He wanted to bring practical ideas forward that would work. So seeing all those figureheads disappear is disappointing, but what we can't do is put all our faith in those figureheads, which is something that I think you and I actually kind of did accidentally. I know you didn't see it but I was watching your videos when Tulsi was running, and I was kind of doing the same thing you were. Like, I was putting everything into a person instead of ideas. So the reason I started doing what I'm doing on Twitter right now is I'm trying to really bring light to these issues. So for me, it's really economic failure that we've had. And some of the best conversations I've had have been with socialists and even people who identify as communists, because we'll start out talking and, they'll see my name and they'll be like, oh God, who is this guy? And, they'll kind of go on their tirade. And then instead of replying with ad hominem attacks, I just explain my position. And a lot of them are actually like, whoa, okay, I still believe what I believe, but I want to hear more about what you believe, because you and I are against the same thing. And your ideas actually make sense. Like our debates we've had, we've disagreed, but we haven't done any name calling or, gone into anything vicious. We just state our opinions. So I think that's the way to bring people out of the darkness and try to get them to realize what our issues are. And I know I could be wrong about some things, and the only way I'm going to find out that I'm wrong is if I talk to people and hear what they have to say. And the only way that they're going to realize they're wrong is listening to something I have to say. So this idea that we should be, reverberating in our own echo chamber of everyone who agrees with us, that doesn't get us anywhere. That just reaffirms that the other side is evil and they hate you. What we need to do is start talking to each other, and we know what the problem is. We have different solutions. So we should talk about how we can solve those. You also asked, how does a libertarian resonate with a young person? So I'm 26, and I think that a lot of people who are older than me, you know, they're not actually going to be dealing with this debt problem that we have. They're not going to be dealing with the collapse of our empire. A lot of them are going to be gone probably by the time that's really an issue. So I think young people really need to care about debt and our monetary policy and our spending. And it's all boring stuff to research, but it's pretty self-explanatory if you really take the time to look into you know, what has led to the downfall of our economic policies. It's really important, and it's actually what drives the war machine. It's what drives the war on drugs, mass incarceration. It's all wrapped up in money. And so it's really important that people know why everything is happening. So I think if anyone's watching this and you're on Twitter, you know, follow me, the Naturalist Capitalist. I'm trying to bring these ideas to light, and whether you agree with me or disagree with me, I'd like to hear your input, and I'm trying to show people what I think. So.
Yeah. All right. You know, it is a real challenge, I think, to try to break through this. And this is why I think a lot of people who identify as progressives, and I've, you know, some of them have asked me, hey, do you want to be on my show? Or maybe we should talk. And I'm fine. I'm up for that. But you talk about an echo chamber. It's all this indie media, and it is an echo chamber. Much of it is like, you know, hey, we're progressives and this is what we believe. And I'll challenge people sometimes, and, you know, I'll say, hey, do you think all, you know, a free-flowing immigration system is a good idea without any real oversight? Because I don't think that's a good idea. I know a lot of libertarians believe in, you know, just straight up immigration with very little regulation, but some believe that we need because most libertarians would believe in sovereignty. So if you don't have a sovereign country, then in other words, you need a border, and you need, you know, a definable border and so forth to be a sovereign country. So I think most libertarians would kind of have a mixed view, but err on the side of, hey, we want to be welcoming. Immigrants are an important part of the country. They can help us build a better country. They can obviously fill roles, job roles and so forth that maybe other people don't find appealing or attractive. But I guess where I'm going with this is that the echo chamber that you feel comfortable with, a lot of times I was in that. You were talking about with Tulsi Gabbard. I felt very comfortable in that Tulsi, with a little bit of Bernie on the side, but Bernie at times said and did things that I was just, I just can't do it with Bernie. But with Tulsi was a different, she was a different character. She had a mix of views, and you could tell if there was anybody who was truly an independent, at least during the bulk of the campaign until the very end, it was Tulsi Gabbard. And a lot of libertarians gravitated to her, and a lot of progressives gravitated to her. And that's the kind of coalition I think you need to build a new movement. I don't care where that movement comes from. It could be green, it could be libertarian, it could be movement for People's Party, Working Party. Again, there's some core things that we all have in common, but at the end of the day, we've got to realize that we've got to wrestle this government away from these corporate entities that are now basically shaping all the policy, spending millions of dollars. And I don't know what your views on lobbyists are. I'd love to hear the libertarian take on lobbyists. And I'll stop. I'll let you talk about that before I forget it. What's your view on all this corporate lobbying?
Yeah. So I don't, again, the problem with libertarianism is it's almost like an idea, because they're not even really much of a party, just like the Green Party. Yeah. So libertarians as people disagree on different things. Mm-hmm. So I am for things like ranked choice voting.
Okay.
I'm for same-day voter registration. I'm for full voting access as easy as it is. And then I am for campaign finance reform. You know, I think that wall between state and business has to go both ways. You can't just stop the state from giving power to the corporations. You also have to stop corporate entities from being able to give money to the government, because it's a two-way street of corruption. So I'm sure there are some libertarians who would disagree with me there. Some people think money is free speech. You know, you should be allowed to give the maximum amount of money to anybody. You know, I don't think that. So I don't represent libertarianism necessarily. I stand behind it because it is the closest alignment with my views. And I want to build a movement on something, because, you know, you could start another party or something, but no one's going to be there. So and the Libertarian Party or the Green Party, you know, they're not the Republican or the Democratic Party. They don't have they're not, you know, they're not completely corrupt to the point that you can't influence them.
Right.
I think the libertarians, if they had a candidate who could bring in a massive amount of people, you could actually shape the libertarian platform. So, you know, now that Justin Amash is gone, I don't love Jacob Hornberger, because Jake Hornberger is not a movement grower. He is, you know, his whole thing during the debates is we need to be 100% pure, and we're only going to win if we have these absolute pure ideologies. And he doesn't even agree with any one of the other candidates running. You know, it's all, I'm more libertarian than you are. And that's not a way to grow anything. Like, I want people like you to feel welcome. Like, I think there can be libertarian approaches to things like climate change. Like, I think climate change, I think regulating the environment should be something the federal government does, because you can't leave that to the state governments. What if Colorado decides they want to dump sludge in the river? You know, Utah is not going to like that because it affects the next state. And then with climate change, it's something that affects all of us. So I think you can make a libertarian argument for that. The government's role in protecting us does involve some regulation. And I think things like the, you know, a free market, I do advocate for that. But if we really got rid of a lot of regulations, there would be some that we'd have to keep. I think if you got rid of government license monopolies, that does a huge deal to, you know, destroy these corporate monopolies we have now where people can't compete. But if you had a really free market, you would have to have things like antitrust laws, because we know what happens without those things, because we can look back in history and see what happens. So I don't think clinging to a crisp ideology is a good way to convey your message to everybody else. I think the best way is to show that the way you approach things can be used for practical solutions to people's problems. So I don't know if that answered all your questions. I might have missed one. That was a long.
No, it was good. It was just meant to spark, you know, a healthy, you know, back and forth dialogue, which I think this is, again, people might, you know, when they watch this video, they may not find the content all that exciting and sexy, and, you know, it's not breaking news, other than the fact that Justin Amash, in case you missed it, because I didn't say it at the beginning and you just mentioned it, he officially said he's decided not to seek the Libertarian Party nomination. That's kind of devastating to now. Here's the way I look at it. And again, my guy right now, if I had to pick somebody, would probably be Howie Hawkins in the Green Party. And I hate to say it, it's because he's kind of like my default fallback on candidate right now. He just is. I was really hoping that Amash would get in, and I was really hoping that he would start to speak to these larger issues, and because we need an alternative to these two horrible candidates who are running. I guess the reason that I'm looking, see, with Howie Hawkins, for instance, and I know you and I don't agree, or you probably don't agree with a bunch of the Green Party stuff, which is fine. But if you start with things like, okay, fervently anti-war, would cut the military budget
Yep.
by 75%. Now, I know that sounds crazy, and I know, you were saying that if, say, a President Hawkins says he wins and he gets up and he says, hey, we're going to cut the military budget by 75%. Most likely, he's not going to get to 75%. He may get some people in the Democratic Party, maybe a few libertarians who are, voting the right way, like Rand Paul and so forth, who would be much, very much on board with cutting the military. So at that point, at least you'd have that debate going in the right direction. Whereas right now, we don't have any of these issues going in that direction when it comes to that issue. Okay. And then there are other issues that Greens and Libertarians share. I get a little worried that the Greens might be authoritarians in some places. And I had Howie Hawkins on this broadcast at one point, and I actually talked to his campaign manager because we had a conversation basically after he was on, and I asked her, I said, a lot of people say Howie's an authoritarian. What say you? And she was like, well, no. And she went on to talk about, giving power to people who are in their locales to make decisions. And to me, it sounded good, but here's the problem. When people hear the word socialist, when they hear eco-socialist New Deal, when they hear these terms thrown around and they say, we're going to do this, and that sounds like the government is going to take the bunch of pile of money that they're going to create out of thin air. We could have another discussion about how that's been going on. And, and remember, you were here in 2008, 2009, shovel-ready jobs. Remember that term? Obama, we're going to have shovel-ready jobs. Well, there were no shovel-ready jobs. Government was so dysfunctional with all the money that they printed that they gave it to car companies and banks and Solyndra. I remember that solar company that got all that money, and then they went belly up and got in the news for a while. It's all really dysfunctional, and I just get concerned. I guess I like the people that say they want to help working people succeed. Your philosophy probably is get out of their way, right, and allow them to succeed and make it fair in the sense that you talked about antitrust and different things that you can do to make the playing field fair the way it's supposed to be, where there's not this collusion between government and corporations. So I'm always listening. Is this person, are they really for working class people? Are they just, this is where there's the crossover between the Greens, Libertarians, Independents. People know that this thing is rigged against working people. And I guess I want your thoughts on that. How, like, if you were to approach some guy who's a truck driver, he's working like 60 hours a week and they're pushing, making him do long hauls and so forth, and he's not sleeping correctly, but his company, this is how he makes the money that he's making because he takes this crazy risk. It risks his health. He's not eating properly. He's not sleeping properly. And he's got no rights. This is what he's got to do. The Greens come along and they say, this guy, we want to make it so he's got rights. We want to make it so whether it's a union or whether it's something that is inherently going to help him when he goes to the boss and says, hey, I can't do this the way you want me to do it. Well, you're fired. I'm just going to get somebody else. I don't know. Inherently, I think to myself, that's not fair. You know what I mean? So what's your take on all of that?
Okay. So I think the government, even when it's being benevolent, sometimes it ends up crushing, small people. So the idea is like things like high minimum wages, high regulations, those help people in a government sense mind. But if you look in a lot of areas, those things actually stifle opportunity. So you mentioned truck driving. I'm actually a truck driver. I've had my CDL since I was 18. I worked for a power line company for a long time, driving trucks. And, setting poles and doing line work and stuff. And we were a non-union company, and we worked for the union company. And the union restrictions just kept getting crazier and crazier and crazier. People started leaving the union and coming to our company because they liked the freedom. They liked being able to do different things, and they like not sending their money to some entity that supposedly represents them, but they have political influence in Washington that they don't agree with. So, the libertarians kind of have a sliding scale of degree of what they think about this. What I think is, if you want to join a union, that should be fine. Like, no one should stop you. That's your right to organize and try to get better benefits or whatever, but you shouldn't force people into being part of a union either. Right. Because unions, though I think they've done a lot of good in this country in the past, a lot of times now they make things harder. They enable companies to get bloated and have liabilities that they can't get rid of. So for example, when I was working for the power line company, the union guys would not work in the rain. They just wouldn't. And they'd get paid to sit in the garage all day. So we were contractors and we weren't unions. So we'd go and we'd work in the rain because we wanted money. If we didn't have if we went home, we didn't get paid. And so they'd get angry at us for doing the work and, getting the power on or whatever. And it's almost like they've become, in some ways, what they were meant to get rid of. So I'm not going to make a blanket statement and say that we should get rid of unions, because that would be authoritarian in my position anyway, but I think you should really allow people to make that choice. And then the idea of the government getting out of the way and letting things prosper, I really do think that way. I think that the government should basically be pruning the tree, because that, like the things that I said about antitrust laws and environmental laws, I think those are little necessary adjustments they need to make to keep things from getting out of control. But that's not what we have. We have cut the tree in half, and then we're blaming capitalism for where we are, when the government has come in and made it so hard to get ahead. I'm thinking of starting my own trucking company, but the regulations are through the roof. The taxes are crazy. 50 years ago, if I wanted to start my own trucking company, it would have been a lot easier, and there would have been more competition and would have had a much greater chance to succeed. But it's actually because of a lot of corporate policies that we've had that give corporations a crutch and an upper leg. And then all these restrictions we throw on, the corporations can survive all those things, where someone who's trying to start out independently can't get anywhere because they're smothered. So I think we can have a conversation about regulations and workers' rights, but I just think, Democrats and probably the Green Party just brings it too far. They want a one-size-fits-all application. Yeah. Libertarians are not necessarily against all government. Like, I'm from New Hampshire, which is known as the most libertarian state, but we have one of the biggest governments in the world. I think we're like the third largest governing body, but it's very decentralized. So every town votes on their own issues. If they want the road upgrade, all the citizens go out and vote. They have a huge House of Representatives, even though it's a small state. They've got councils. So we're not against government. We're against centralized planning, just like a few people deciding this is going to be best for everybody. That's really what we're against. So, it's not, if you had a libertarian president, he's not going to outlaw unions or something, because that goes against the libertarian philosophy. Right. It's the idea that you let people make their own decisions. And I think the government really sucks at making decisions, even though I believe in some environmental regulation. When we were working in swamps, back in the day, you used to just drive a machine into the swamp as long as it wasn't too wet and you wouldn't sink too deep. Then you'd use mats. But now what they've designated as a wetland is much more liberal than it used to be. It's like, if there's some sort of plant, even if it's dry ground that doesn't have any water on it, it's a wetland. So what you need to do is bring all these mats in that you can drive over. So then you end up bringing 15 truckloads of mats that sit in the swamp for 2 weeks and kill everything that they're sitting on top of. You waste all that fuel driving the trucks back and forth, and you spend way more money where you could have just driven. Sometimes the wetland isn't wet at all. You could just drive in and drive out and cause, in 3 weeks you wouldn't even know you'd been there. So I just don't think that the more centralized government you have and the more authority it has, that things will be better. I think people suck in general, but when you have fewer people making more decisions for the masses, then you're just going to have really bad legislation. So that's really what I'm against.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. And, it's good to get your perspective on this. You gave some real life application, which I think people, people like myself and others that do channels on here and can speak kind of from their little perch and not actually get their hands dirty doing this stuff. I think it's important to get a working perspective, and you brought that, which I appreciate. I wanted to get your take on how the country is handling this COVID-19 crisis and what you see from your perspective. And again, I'm not saying you're looking through everything through libertarian goggles or whatnot, but in recent days, maybe the last couple of weeks, I've started to feel just as if something's not right about this. Beyond, obviously the health problems, and I think there's going to be tremendous fallout from this economically. I think there's going to be other health issues, mental health issues, depression, opioid abuse, alcoholism, domestic violence, and so forth. I heard one person say at the beginning of all this that the cure for this is worse than the actual problem itself. And I'm starting to kind of move in that direction. I used to think at the beginning of this that everybody was a freak if they were going outside without a mask on and so forth. Now I went on Twitter, I said, do some research about wearing a mask all day long. You're not a surgeon. A surgeon is there to operate on somebody. A surgeon is there to prevent their stuff from going in the work that they're doing on their patient. It has nothing to do with keeping stuff out. Okay. And I know that the argument is, well, I don't know if I'm sick. So if I go out, I might be asymptomatic. I go out with this mask. I'm protecting everybody from this. How do you know they're not? You know what I mean? So it's like the whole thing is starting to just feel weird, feeling like not necessarily conspiracy, mind you, but I don't want to go that far. But I do feel as though this is an opportunity for overreach and authoritarianism, and I think we might be there. And I was just wondering what your take was.
Yeah, so it's just like 9/11. There were people who came up with crazy conspiracy theories that I still think are crazy about the Twin Towers. I think, but it didn't mean that just because people were coming up with crazy conspiracy theories that the government wasn't overreaching, because they definitely were. They abused the crap out of 9/11 to get a bunch of policies through that we still deal with. So I think there are crazy conspiracy theories going on about COVID-19, but just because there are crazy conspiracy theories doesn't mean that we shouldn't be worried about what you're talking about. Like that HR 6666 Act, I read it, and I think there are conspiracy theories forming about it. To me, it wasn't explicitly horrible. What it was really vague and seemed to kind of leave the door open for abuse. There were a lot of undefined terms, and there was a sunset clause that I don't like. It's $100 billion a year in funding for any entity the CDC deems necessary. And then when you start talking about contact tracing with the federal government being involved, I think it's completely reasonable to be skeptical of it. I think it's I think some people are taking it too far and saying, you know, they're going to round us up and take your children away and put them in camps. You know, that's a bit of a stretch, but I think it's healthy to have skepticism and be worried. I think the approach has just been ridiculous. And to be fair, at the beginning, we didn't know what to expect. Like I was way more scared of the disease 2 months ago than I am now.
Yeah.
But I feel like the government doesn't want to admit it made a mistake and say, okay, you know, we probably overreacted. We can open up our economy responsibly again. We can let states and towns and individuals decide if they feel comfortable going back to work.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and I hate to draw a line, but it does seem like the Democrats mostly are hanging on to this tightly. Like, you know, we're not going to open up. It's almost like they want government dependence, which I don't know why anyone trusts the government right now with how they've reacted, with where you've seen all the money going. And so if you're against these bailouts and just printing off money, you get demonized. You know, I am against just printing off money. I don't think that results in good economic turnouts down the road. I don't think that we should be bailing out state governments. I think the only conversation we should have is about bailing out people who've lost their jobs. I don't think like a straight up UBI to everybody. You know, like I don't need money. I don't want money from the federal government right now. I saved money. I'm okay. I do not want that money. And I don't, you know, they say, oh, you could just give it to someone else. It's like, well, I don't want you printing off that money because when, you know, people are saying, oh, look, inflation isn't happening. You know, you guys are being paranoid. They don't realize the crisis doesn't cause inflation. It's the government that would cause inflation by just printing off trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars till kingdom come. And, you know, that doesn't help anything. Just like, you know, rent strikes and mortgage strikes, like they sound good on a surface level, but if you think about it, you know, if the government comes in and says, okay, you don't need to pay your landlord. Okay, landlord, you don't need to pay the bank gets a loan from the Federal Reserve. And so it's not like that money just disappears and is completely forgiven, you know, like it just gets pushed back farther. So the longer we just keep, you know, piling up money and deficits and, you know, printing money and bailing out states, we're not helping the problem. And if you have that attitude, a lot of people almost demonize you, like you just don't care about people. It's like, no, I do care about people, and a Great Depression or hyperinflation is going to hurt way more than a disease that has a 99.5% survival rate. So to sum it all up, what you asked, like I do think we should be vigilant about the government abusing its power here. And I do think the government has had a horrible response. And I think states and towns and individuals should be allowed to make decisions based on their own scenarios. Because New York City obviously has way worse issues than, you know, Cody, Wyoming. Cody, Wyoming should not have the same restrictions or funding that New York City does.
So basically not a one size fits all type approach to this, which kind of a no-brainer, but you know, in today's political world, we're seeing where it's kind of this all or nothing approach to things, and it's a lot of one-upsmanship and gamesmanship between the Democrats and the Republicans, and there's really no concern. I mean, I tweeted out today that, okay, so the Democrats have a $3 trillion bill, which if you look at it, there's a ton of cronyism in there. You mentioned that I think everybody from libertarian to hardcore green progressive says UBI would be a much better, again, stop with this nonsense of giving it to people who these larger corporations and airlines, and you mentioned, you know, the bankruptcy laws, which apparently nobody wants to go bankrupt anymore. Everybody just wants to avoid that. It may show people how poorly managed those companies are if they actually have to go bankrupt and restructure, but that's how things used to be. But my wife, we're all like, how come they're not just giving it to the people that have been thrown out of work? And the government caused this because they said, you've got to abide by these new rules, the CDC and all of, whether you think those rules are good or not, that's not the issue. The issue is, for instance, my wife can't go to work now because she's considered a non-essential employee, and she works for a health organization, which is crazy to think. But if you go through hospital systems right now, because of what they've prioritized, and because many of them are receiving this money based on certain things, they have to jump through this hoop in order to get the money. And that money is supposedly there to keep them from going belly up. But you know what they're doing with it? They're trying to just save. They're just trying to cut costs, and the bottom line is the bottom line, and it's just the ultimate in corruption. I wanted to just ask you maybe one more question, because we're getting to the point where I don't know if people are going to hang on and watch us for this long. I don't want to bore them to tears, but they may find the conversation interesting between somebody like yourself and somebody like myself, and who knows, it may start other conversations. There are a lot of independent commentators like myself. There's this guy who I've had talks with. He's called the Vigilant Independent. He kind of plagiarized me a little bit, but I don't care, because it's cool, because we need more people who are independent minded. And he kind of thinks like I do in some regards. He kind of thinks that it's not all left, it's not all right. It's somewhere, the truth is somewhere in the middle, or it could be on the left and it could be on the right. And we need to have the courage to kind of, look at one issue and say, okay, this is a good solution to this issue. I didn't think it was going to come from this group of people, but who cares, right? It's a solution to the problem. And talk about, I think this will be the last question. Talk about what your views are when it comes to this tribalism that has gripped this country in a way. When I say tribalism, in case people don't know what I mean, it's like, again, the D's against the R's, and the horse race, and Trump is this and Biden is that. And it's the media, they're obsessed with Trump every single day. They can't wait to find something that Trump said or did, which is, I think, the reason we need to get rid of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, he's too much of a distraction from actual policy and ideas. So speak to that, and then we'll wrap things up here.
So destroying tribalism is actually one of the biggest things I'm trying to do. I criticize the the people who push capitalism the most, which are the Republicans, and I call them out because I say, you guys are not capitalists. Like, you guys are all for corporate cronyism. So you guys are hypocrites. And then I call the Democrats out on being anti-war, pro-civil liberties, for human rights. I say, no, you're not. So I kind of surprise people, I think, because they're, especially on Twitter, when someone sees me say something negative about Trump, they'll instantly assume I'm a Biden supporter. So they'll jump on me, and then I'll give them a response that they're kind of like, whoa, okay, that's not what I was expecting. And they just want to hear more, because my ideology isn't wrapped up in a political party, not even the libertarian party, really. It's just the closest thing that fits what I think. So I think the best way, I think this tribalism exists because people decide like 3 issues they care about. So it'll be guns, abortion, and weed, or whatever. And so then they'll have a candidate that agrees with on one of those issues. So then they just resign the rest of their conscience to whatever they think. So they don't even realize they're doing that year by year, because if in 2016 it was Trump who was their gun guy, in 2012 it was Romney, in 2008 it was McCain. And even though those 3 guys might have different views on different issues, they don't even know, because they just care about those couple issues that are central to them. And so then they'll just assume that the Republican Party is the essence of what they believe, and the Democratic Party is the ultimate evil and the polar opposite. So what you have to do is really get people to think outside of those couple issues. You have to bring those issues home. That's what I'm trying to do, because a lot of people think of libertarians as like rich white guys who, want to protect their investments or whatever.
Yeah.
But, I'm a working class person who's
Right.
dealt with unions and who's dealt with government regulation that's stupid, so I can say, look, I have firsthand experience. I've lived very responsibly. I've lived well within my means. I've saved my money. I've invested my money, and I have a very easy economic time because of it. And then also another way I can reach out to people to break the tribalism is, both parties are not about fixing our lifestyle. The Democrats want a multi-trillion Green New Deal so that we can keep our current lifestyle, but with green energy, where I would say, no, that's ridiculous. You are not going to achieve that. We need to start living more locally. We need to start living within our means. If we got rid of our destructive monetary policies, people wouldn't be able to consume as much as they are now, because they're consuming so much because they have loans that give them money to buy stuff they don't have. So I can really bring this message to kind of any corner of the political spectrum. And I think that is the way to break that black and white, red and blue dichotomy, because it's just so false, because there's no solutions from either of them. They're basically the same, and they've completely trapped the minds of the people, and that's why they're successful, because they can make you hate the other side. So instead of you realizing that they are what evil and needs to go, you think your Democrat neighbor is evil because he wants to take your AR-15, or you think your Republican neighbor is evil because he wants to imprison gay people or something. They just come up with these completely fake ideas that we have about each other. And it's just not true. So the best way is to show what we have in common, show that, I do think the libertarian approach of letting people make their own decisions and not using a one size fits all is the most, you could say, progressive way forward, like the one that's going to work. I don't think the other parties really give solutions that are individualistic. I don't know if that answers your question. So
no, just basically, the way you answered it and gave the summary, that's exactly what I was looking for. I mean, the tribalism thing drives me so crazy. It's one of those things that if I had even the opposite political views that I have, or if I was really far right, or wherever I was in the spectrum, and each day, all it is it's let's talk about how the Democrats are horrible or the Republicans are horrible, and those are your main talking points. And to me, it obscures the real conversation about these issues that you and I have been talking about, and we can never get there because all we're doing is it's like going to a football game. It's like one team throws a touchdown, the other team comes back, throws a touchdown. Okay, we're at a stalemate. I mean, our elections every single time are like razor thin margins. You're staying up all night long to find out who the winner is. And sometimes when you wake up in the morning, you still don't know who the winner is. And I think that's a sign of a really screwed up system, because when somebody talks, there should be a majority of people that hear what they're saying and say, okay, I like what they're saying. Those are the issues I care most about, and I'm going to vote for that person. Now, Trump, for better or for worse, played the Electoral College well last time and campaigned in states where Hillary Clinton decided to, sleep in and so forth. And he ended up, I think, surprising himself. I think my theory about Trump is this was just a big publicity stunt. He could have went on TV for another 10 years and had reality shows and been a guest on everybody's show and been a rock star, but he won the presidency, and then now he's doing what Trump would do if he were running a casino. And I think people initially thought that was cool, but now they're like, oh my gosh, what did we do? Some people, I mean, some of his supporters, you could like he said in a debate or whenever, he could say, I could walk out of my hotel and shoot somebody and people would still vote for me. And I think that's the problem. I think And, you know, and I was guilty a little bit of this supporting Tulsi Gabbard. I've repented, by the way, many times. Some of the
Yeah.
people who follow me have not repented. They've doubled down and they've called me out and called me
Yeah.
all kinds of names. But at the end of it all, I'm not for a person necessarily as much as I'm for solutions to problems. So I guess that's
Right.
where I'm, you know, where I'm coming from. But I wanted to thank you for coming
Can I
on.
say something about?
Sure.
Can I say something about Tulsi Gabbard real quick?
Yeah, no problem.
So I think being a supporter, you should be the first one to call out the person you support when they don't do what you expected them to do.
Right.
And you get so much hatred for that. You know, we get angry at Trump supporters for not admitting that Trump didn't end the wars, that he didn't have free market policies, that he hasn't balanced the deficits, that he, you know, hasn't drained the swamp. And those are all completely reasonable criticisms. So when someone you support does something you don't like, you should be the first person to criticize them for that. And I don't despise Tulsi Gabbard. I still think she's probably better than 80% of everyone in Congress.
Right.
You know, but I just like you, I said, I'm not impressed with what she's done and she doesn't have my support anymore. And that's totally reasonable. And that's how people should be, because if we cling to politicians instead of what they do, how are we ever going to, you know, fix any of our problems?
Yeah.
So.
Well, you're preaching to the choir, sir. So, I want to, you know, before I leave, I just want to thank you for coming on. You know, my channel is what it is. I tell people, you know, I've been around the same amount of subscribers now. It's just stopped because a lot of people in the channel was growing. And then, you know, I decided that I could, you know, Tulsi drops out. So I don't know what, even if I still like Tulsi, and I said, well, she's not running for president anymore. People say, well, you know, Tulsi for governor of Hawaii or Tulsi 2024. And I'm like, oh, okay, you know, we'll see what happens in 2024. I'd like to get busy today building a movement, talking to people like yourself and trying to convince people that this two-party nonsense it's destroying us, and we need better, whether it's green, libertarian, people's party, whatever you want to call it. Something has to give where people, independents, libertarians, conservatives, progressives, they have a place to go, you know? And so my mission here from here on out is to kind of, you know, sound the alarm that I'm not playing anymore. You know what I mean? I'm not about clicks or views, because you can watch how many people are watching these videos now. It's about integrity. It's about telling people maybe some hard truths that they don't want to listen to, but it's also about maybe celebrating some of the common things that we have. Maybe celebrating isn't the right word, but highlighting those things so people know that they're not alone, you know, because I think right now, you know, one of my handles on YouTube, or one of my descriptives, is I'm a political refugee, and I still believe that. So any last words, Reed, before we call it a show? Yeah,
so I just want to thank you so much for having me on, and I am sort of starting something like that. I started my Twitter account. I didn't use it much, but when Tulsi was running, just to kind of vote in polls or whatever. But then after she dropped out, I decided, okay, I need to make a difference. So I'm actually trying to do the same thing you are. So if anyone's watching this, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm the Naturalist Capitalist, and I talk about what that name means is I also like to talk a little bit about religious ideas. That's where my naturalist half comes in, and then the capitalist part is I like to talk about government and our you know, the monetary problems we have and the systemic problems we have, and then just talking about personal responsibility and bettering yourself. So if you guys want to follow me, and I'm thinking about maybe starting a YouTube channel sometime, we'll see how that goes. But thanks for having me and giving me a platform. So.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. David and Reed hashing it out. You can check Reed out over on Twitter again at the natural. It's just Naturalist Capitalist, right? At Naturalist Capitalist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's at Reed Coverdale. My username is
Oh,
the
okay.
Naturalist Capitalist.
Got it. So it would be
yeah.
at Reed Coverdale. All right. So until next time, folks, thanks for tuning in, and more content eventually heading your way soon. And we'll see you then.